First off, I'd just like to remember Jane. She was a beautiful human being, and she was a big instrument to my undergrad career here at UCSD, and kind of led me to this pathway, being a part of the CSP program. So this is to her. Cool. Yeah. So today we'll be discussing quantifying carbon stock in the Batiquitos Lagoon, implications for conservation and nature-based solutions to reduce the impacts of climate change. So an overview of what we'll be discussing. We'll start off with my motivation and goals of my Capstone project. We'll then get into some background of the current blue carbon research. We'll get into my methodology, some findings and results, my discussion, and we'll finish off with some recommendations. So, surprisingly, the California State Coastal Conservancy has found that within the last 140 years, San Diego has lost 75% of its wetlands. So as you can see, this is an image here of the Batiquitos Lagoon, which is the site in which we'll be discussing. You can imagine this salt marsh used to be way larger, but now you can just see a narrow swath of salt marsh remaining with development on the coastline and an invasive species of eucalyptus groves above. So the decline and degradation of salt marshes is not only detrimental for biodiversity loss, but also in terms of carbon storage and sequestration. So the degradation of these ecosystems can lead these carbon sinks to become carbon sources and actually emitting that stored carbon back into the atmosphere. So despite their importance, blue carbon ecosystems in San Diego County and around the world for that matter are threatened by a variety of stressors, including climate change, pollution, and coastal development. So the primary objective of this Capstone project is to contribute by collecting, processing, and analyzing the available data to understand the distinct factors influencing the variability of salt marsh carbon stock within the Batiquitos Lagoon. So, what is blue carbon? The term blue carbon refers to the fraction of atmospheric carbon that is captured and stored in sediments of coastal wetlands, such as mangroves here on the left-hand side, salt marshes, and seagrasses. For this research project, we'll be focusing on the center one, which is the salt marsh. So these ecosystems are a critical component of the coastal ecosystem as they provide a number of ecological services, which include carbon sequestration and storage, which we mentioned, nutrient cycling, sediment stabilization, and habitat for a diverse range of organisms. Furthermore, they protect coastal zones from storm and sea level rise, are phenomenal at water filtration, and act as a space for recreational activity. So, our location. The Batiquitos Lagoon, I'm not sure if many of you have been there, but it's along the I-5 freeway in the city of Carlsbad, and is a coastal wetland ecosystem that supports a diverse array of plant and animal species, including several endangered and threatened species. So our study area includes 5 transects. So starting on the west-hand side, we have transect 1, making our way eastward to transect 5, and we have 3 additional points, points 1, points 3, and transects 2, 1.5, and these are just because the salt marsh is very narrow, so we took additional sites there because we could not get the full transect. So as you can see, some of the sites end in a number 1, and that means that they're a low intertidal zone. So the low intertidal virtually means that it's always underwater except during the lowest of spring tides. On the other hand, the ones that end in 2, as you can see here, are the high intertidal zone, and these are only covered by the highest of high tides and spend its time acting as a terrestrial habitat. So we'll be discussing high and low intertidal a lot during this project, so it's important for us to all kind of understand that. So within the salt marsh, there are several flowering species of plants, which include Spartina foliosa, which we have here on the left-hand side, Salicornia pacifica, and Jumea cornosa. So these plants are awesome as they are adapted to the harsh environmental conditions of the salt marsh, including fluctuating salinity levels, high temperatures, and low oxygen levels. So a comprehensive assessment of the carbon stock was conducted using a standardized methodology. The analysis involved the determination of bulk density, which we measured in grams per centimeter cubed, percent organic carbon, which is percent OC, organic carbon density, which is grams of organic carbon per centimeter cubed, and carbon stock, which is megagrams of organic carbon per hectare. So the calculations of bulk density involved dividing the dry weight of each soil sample by the corresponding sample's volume. By multiplying that bulk density with the percent organic carbon of each soil sample, we were able to obtain the carbon density of each subsample. Then the carbon density values of each individual subsample were averaged within each sediment layer, so based on the sediment type, so if it was like clay or sand or mud, things like that, and integrated with depth to ascertain the carbon stock of each individual core. So these are the cool little videos. So sampling activities occurred on 8 separate occasions between a 2-month period of December and February. During this time, we collected a total of 85 sediment samples. Next up, we took these samples back to the lab, dried them out in an oven. Quick video, sorry. We processed them into a fine-grained powder and homogenized them, and then they went through acid fumigation here to remove calcium carbonate so that we only had solely organic carbon contents. Lastly, these approximately 10 milligrams of each subsample were precisely weighed into tin capsules down at the Aluahari lab down here at Vaughn Hall, and this analysis provided the mass percentage of organic carbon present in each sample. Cool little videos. So our first analysis. So we wanted to see the relationship between bulk density and percent organic carbon. So using the 13 cores that we found, we wanted to see the inverse association between bulk density and organic carbon content. So it's a bit messy, but this graphic here showcases on the blue, the left-hand side is the blue low intertidal, and on the right-hand side is the red high intertidal. Our x-axes are organic carbon percentage and bulk density, with our y-axes being core depth. And we're looking at this from the sediment column, so we're looking at 0 at the top and working our way downward. So our inverse association suggests that the denser sediment layers tend to have a lower organic carbon concentration, and this is seen in a number of other studies of tidal wetlands. Secondly, we found that depth was a key factor between the high and low intertidal zones, as our lowest point was in the high intertidal over here, which was at 14 centimeters, and our deepest point was at 266 centimeters in the low intertidal zone. Specifically, the characteristics of our carbon content was very diverse between the low and high intertidal, with the carbon content being in the top 60 centimeters of the low intertidal and 30 centimeters of the high intertidal. So this is just one of our graphics of that profile, just kind of the last one was a bit busy, so this is just one, showcasing the inverse relationship between organic carbon and bulk density. So they kind of mirror each other and go back and forth. It's like playing basketball or something. So we then multiplied the bulk density with the percent organic carbon, and that's how we were able to ascertain the carbon density. And then we wanted to see what was actually driving the carbon stock in our salt marsh. We ran a coefficient of variation and found that carbon density had a value of 0.62, and maximum sediment depth had a value of 0.66. So they had a pretty equal determinant of this carbon stock, which is very cool, because usually past research has found that the depth played the biggest factoring role. So with that, we wanted to see kind of where the carbon stock was located in terms of our 13 core sites. So here on our y-axis, we have the carbon stock, and then on our x-axis, we have each individual site matching our geographical map going west to east, with Transect 1 all the way to Transect 5. The high intertidal core sites are in red, and the blue are the low intertidal core sites. So we investigated to see kind of and explore whether the low intertidal and high intertidal exhibited differential characteristics in regards to their carbon stock. To address this, we used the data set of the 6 low intertidal and 7 high intertidal. The geographical representation reveals that the high intertidal, the highest carbon stocks were found in the low intertidal zones, though we found a large variation within our data set, making simple generalizations nearly impossible. We believe that the low intertidal might have a higher carbon content due to the high vegetation density, low decomposition rates, the anoxic conditions, and the minimal levels of disturbances that they see. So this is the same graphic, same x and y coordinates, but we just clumped them together and ran a statistical test, and this is a violin plot. So red is the high intertidal, blue is the low intertidal. We compared them using a non-parametric test because of the unequal variances to determine whether the two means were equal. The test did not yield significant results, and we believe this is due to the relatively small data set with high variance. So despite the lack of statistical significance, this paired with our last graphic kind of visually showcases that the low intertidal does have a higher carbon content. And these findings do align with a number of previous research as well. So here's the geographical map we saw before, but now just with the carbon content in circles, kind of showing the size. So the size kind of shows that the low intertidal does have larger carbon content, And we found a diverse range ranging from 2.6 megagrams of organic carbon per hectare all the way up to almost 239 megagrams of organic carbon per hectare. So it's important to acknowledge our limitations within our study, particularly the small sample size of our 13 cores and the large variance. And we proposed that the inclusion of a larger data set would enable a more statistical robust analysis to kind of represent the lower intertidal having a greater carbon stock. So with that, we wanted to kind of compare ourselves to other previous literature. So a growing body of research has been devoted to estimating carbon stock within the coastal wetlands across North America and the United States. However, despite this growing attention, wetlands in California, specifically San Diego, are remaining underrepresented in scientific literature. So we compared our mean carbon stocks to Weiss et al., who's from 1998, so over 20 years ago, who looked at the Tijuana River estuary, to Ward et al. From 2021, who looked at 3 salt marsh locations in California, and Kaufman et al., who looked at a number of sites along the U.S. West Coast, but we just took their sites, which were salt marshes within California. So similar to our study, Kaufman et al. Found large variation within their data set, and they did their examination on a larger scale. So this variability suggests that maybe large variation within the salt marshes is just the norm. It's the characteristic of the salt marsh, and that not necessarily our data is a shortcoming, but rather a reflection of reality. So as you can see, our carbon stock is a bit lower than everyone else's, and we just, that's because of our limitations within our study. So, given our limited size, if we were to continue running this test, we would have a more equivalent and comparable study to the rest of these. So the present study provides insight into the factors that shape the carbon stocks of the Batiquitos Lagoon's salt marsh. Our findings underscore the importance of safeguarding vegetation, facilitating organic matter inputs, and preserving deeper sediment layers for long-term storage. Also, the integration of these objectives into conservation strategies enables stakeholders to effectively conserve these valuable carbon stocks. These insights not only advance our comprehension of carbon dynamics within the coastal ecosystems, but also bears insight into implications for future design of conservation. Lastly, we have some recommendations. So the main one is restoring eelgrass beds, which are, as you can see in this graphic, are downslope of the salt marsh, which are also downslope of the riparian ecosystem. So restoring eelgrass beds can enhance carbon storage capacity and promote long-term habitat resilience against rising sea levels. As sea level rises, eelgrass beds located just downslope from the salt marsh may migrate upward and colonize the former salt marsh areas. This can maintain a certain level of carbon sequestration and potentially protect existing carbon stocks, by adding like an extra lid, so to say, on top of that existing carbon stock. Secondly, the integration of advanced remote sensing techniques such as aerial imagery and LiDAR can be paired with field surveys to create a more accurate and up-to-date map of the intertidal zones and their associated carbon stocks. And these maps can inform decision makers and those processes related to coastal land use planning, restoration, prioritization, and conservation strategies. Lastly, the establishment of long-term monitoring can track the changes in carbon stock, vegetation dynamics, sedimentation rates, and other relevant parameters within the salt marsh ecosystem. And it is crucial for us to begin these long-term monitoring processes. So with that, I'd like to thank Dr. Matthew T. Costa, Carlos Gallardo, the Batiquitos Lagoon Foundation, Dr. Corey Gabriel, Dr. Mark Merrifield, Hannah Gruen, my awesome family and friends, and the CSP cohort. You guys have been legends this past year, so thank you. Any questions? No questions. Cool. I'm down. I'm good for that. Yeah. Oh, you got one? Oh, okay.
My question is, if you had sort of unlimited resources, budget, et cetera, to do further research on this, what would that look like if you could design that?
Yeah. So I was able to do this research thanks to Matthew Costa and Wild Coast, who has the funding for this program. So actually, I was able to do the research under Matt's, larger San Diego County assessment of carbon stocks. So I was able just to kind of work specifically in this wetland. But yeah, they have funding still to continue this research, and so I'm actually going to help continue that process so that we can look at all the other salt marsh ecosystems in San Diego.
Hey, Nick.
Hey, Corey.
How's it going?
Hanging out,
Good.
not
good.
sweating.
Is this mic picking up my voice? Oh, so I don't need to scream. Okay. I am wondering about the what it would look like, maybe like a 10-year plan or whatever, to possibly have some sort of quantifiable carbon offset or something like that that could be, I guess, like a somewhat fungible, tradable thing, like basically blue carbon in the form of an offset.
Right.
Do you see a pathway toward that, or are there too many issues that are daunting between here and there?
Yeah, I think, as you've seen through this research and previous research within salt marshes specifically, that it's highly variable. I know a lot of offsets are occurring with mangrove forests and other things like that, but it's just so hard to kind of get a specific number each year to that carbon stock. So if you're selling an offset credit, for that year, thinking that that's that number, but it's really not, you're kind of overselling and kind of, impacting the earth in a harmful way. So, am I a fan of offsets? I don't really know. But I think, so that we have the long-term monitoring, we can actually see how these ecosystems work so that we could, actually see if that's a viable option.
Didn't there be any utility and maybe like some regulations or laws to start looking into how that processes work? Because I could see an opportunity for people to kind of promote not so viable, realistic kind of BS offsets in this space.
Yeah,
to be
exactly.
honest.
And there's so minimal salt marshes in California and the United States in general. So the last thing we want to do is oversell them. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of regulations that need to go into it if you are looking into doing offsets with these salt marshes.